Welcome to MWM. Today we are going to break down form. We're going to be focusing on all lower body movement patterns. What I want to get across in these type of classes is helping you notice what type of sensations you're feeling in your body, exactly where your body should be in space as you're doing these moves without getting so much into like the scientific jargon, because like that has its time and place, but at the end of the day, how do you do the movement? How should you feel during the movement? That's how you're going to get stronger. Today we are going to break down 3 different movement patterns: a deadlift, a squat, and a lunge. Some of the cues I'm going to say for all of them because they relate to everything lower body, but we'll also get very specific about what each of those should look like. There are 2 main things I want you to think about for all of these moves though. First is your stance. Now obviously you can just kind of like stand casually in a normal neutral stance, and that's fine. But when you're working with lower body, you want to be super grounded into the floor before anything else happens. The way I make that happen for myself is take your foot out in front of you like so, and then do this. See, like you're twisting from your hip, you're opening up from your hip and your foot is moving. Now stand with your feet right under your body and imagine you're doing that same motion, but you're not actually moving your feet. So I'm just actively turning out, actively kind of engaging everything before I go into my movement. That is that mind-muscle connection that people always talk about. All it really is engaging your muscles. Like I can stand here and squeeze my butt. Squeeze, squeeze. That's like mind-muscle connection, and that's what I want before you even start any of your movement. So again, I'm standing tall, I'm externally rotating, I'm tucking underneath so I feel my glutes turn on, I have a slight bend in my legs, and then I'm pushing into like my heel, my big toe, and my little toe. So that I'm kind of making that triangle shape with my feet. And from this position, I feel really strong, really stable to go into everything else. The second thing I want you to be mindful of is your breath. It can really make or break your exercise. And I always think breathe on the effort. Breathe out on the hardest part of the movement. So for a squat, when I'm lowering, that's easy. There's no gravity pushing. I'm not really working lowering. It's as I push up, that's the hard part. That's where I'll breathe out. Deadlift, when I lower, easy. When I come up, that's the hard part. That's where I'm gonna breathe out. A lot of times though, in our cardio sculpt classes, we're just going. There's not enough time to be like we're not building strength, right? Those like deep breaths that you take, that's when you're lifting like 100 pounds. That's when you really use your breath. In our classes, when it's kind of cardio and strength together, just try to breathe consistently. If you're someone that feels like you're losing your breath a lot, think of breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Nice deep breaths as big as you can, and that's gonna help you build strength. Let's start with a deadlift. Now, one of the biggest questions I get is like, what is even the difference between a squat and a deadlift? My simplest explanation is a squat goes down and up, a deadlift goes back and forward, okay? So those are the movement patterns we are looking for. What muscle groups are working? Obviously your glutes, your hamstrings, and all of your back muscles will be working in a deadlift. Your secondary muscles are like your triceps and your core, but like, little tip, your core is secondary muscles for every single move I'm gonna break down ever. She's always working for you. She's always on your team, okay? You're going to start your deadlift position, standing in that nice grounded position, and your weights are in front of you. Most of the time in these classes, we're doing a stiff leg deadlift. So that means there's only gonna be a slight bend in our knees. Sometimes you'll see people do a deadlift where they pull from the ground. If you're keeping the weights in your hands the entire time, that's a stiff leg deadlift, and that's always what we do, also called a Romanian deadlift. So your weights will be in front of you. Your hips are tracking behind you. So I track down and then I pull up. An easy way to kind of feel this in your body is if you take your hand right at your starting point where your hip starts, and then leave your hand there trying to push your hips behind. So the first thing that happens is I'm pushing my hips back. And the only reason my chest is dropping is because my hips are pulling behind me. I'm allowing my weights to kind of graze down my legs, and I'm looking to stop about mid-shin, and then I come right back up. The reason for that, the reason you want that very specific range of motion is watch my hips and back. So I'm pushing back, my hips are still tracking. When I get about here, my hips aren't gonna move any further. Any further here, it's only going to be in my lower back that I'm getting the strength in, which is what we don't want. So that's why sometimes you might feel it in your back. If you do, just go until you feel like your hips aren't moving anymore, and then come right back up. That's kind of the sweet spot I want you to live in. Now that you know the movement pattern, my hips go back, my hips push forward. What should you feel in your body? You should feel your glutes, your hamstrings having a little bit of a stretch as you push back. And then you're thinking of pushing forward, and you should squeeze everything together. Sometimes I'll see people like, give me a big thrust forward at the end. You don't need all that. Just come back to that nice neutral position. Now, obviously you're focused on the lower body, but your upper body has to be working as well, especially your back. I'm gonna show you something. Tell me if you can see the difference between this motion and this motion. Right? My shoulders are collapsed. I'm not using my lats at all. I need to make sure everything is engaged in the back of my body so that I can be really specific about how I go down and up, especially as you add more weight, as you get stronger. You're gonna need those lats, that good habit there, holding your arms back to make sure everything stays nice and stable. Now, deadlifts are important because you do them 1,000 times a day. Think of every time you pick something up off the ground, you're bending and lifting something. Now, obviously, every time there's something on the ground, I don't expect you to be like, pick it up. No, no one's doing that. But we practice certain movement patterns in classes so that when we're going through it in life and we're a little more like not thinking about what our body is doing, our body will take those good habits, it will engage things on its own because you practiced it in class. Now let's try it. Go grab yourself a set of weights. Think something heavy that's going to like give you a little bit of weight underneath you. And let's practice everything we talked about. So stand nice and tall. I'm gonna face the side so you can really watch. I'm standing nice and tall. My weights are in front of me. It's kind of on my thighs, and my shoulders are pulled back. The first thing that happens is I'm externally rotating those legs. I'm engaging everything, which just means squeezing everything. And then I'm pushing my hips back as I reach down, and then I squeeze everything back up. I'm taking everything down, and I'm squeezing everything back up. How does it feel? A little different with the weights, right? You want those weights to just glide down your body and right back up. Something else I also see, that arms will kind of lead away from your body. You want them to stay attached so that when you get to the bottom, your weights are kind of like directly above the middle of your foot, and that happens by engaging those arms back and standing nice and tall, and you'll feel that all on your hamstrings, all on your glutes, all on your posterior chain. Our second movement is a squat. Now, primary muscles are quad, hamstrings, glutes, calves, adductors, and then obviously secondary is what? Core. I'm gonna say it for every single move. Now, like we just talked about, a deadlift is going forward and back. A squat is going down and up. Another difference between the two is during our deadlift, it's your hip joint, which is like the dominant moving joint. I'm bending at my hip, I'm standing up. With a squat, your hip is obviously gonna have some movement in it, but the primary like lever that I want you to think about is your knee joint. So you're bending there first. Obviously you'll get some movement in the hip, but the focus is on the knees and dropping down. Now, lots of different types of squats you can do. There's regular squats, sumo squats, tons of them. A good way to find like your personal squat distance is take your feet together, turn your feet out, then turn them back, that's about the size of like a neutral, normal squat. If you do it one more time plus, that's about this distance I want for a sumo. So if you're ever like, if I'm like sumo squats at you real quick and you're like, what is the distance? I'm too far, I'm not feeling stable. Just one plus, and that's your sumo. But we're gonna focus on just the regular squat today. So find that nice neutral stance right underneath your hips, and don't have body dysmorphia on me. This is not the size of your hips. Pull that leg in. One turnout, that is all you need. Now, give yourself a little natural more turnout. They don't need to be straight forward. Natural turnout, we start immediately externally rotated, and we think of lowering. So you wanna lower as low as you can go without lifting your heels and coming right back up. So again, I go as low as I can without lifting my heels and coming right back up. When you're doing a squat, what you should feel in your body is this feeling of pushing the ground away. So you're not just standing up, you are pushing down. So as you're lowering, you're controlling it on the way down. Then instead of thinking up, can you think of pushing through the ground? Think of like when you're stepping up to an elevated surface, you're not just thinking about up. You have to push your body to get there. You have to push down to get to that elevated surface. That's essentially what you're doing, right? You're lowering yourself, pretend you're stepping up onto something, and push the ground away. That sensation is gonna completely change how you're using the floor, and it's gonna help you engage all of your muscles. From the side, I'm trying to keep my chest lifted, my eyesight kind of out and a little bit down. I go down, I come back up. Now, everyone's squat is going to look a little different, and that really has to just do with the length of your thigh bone, right? If you have a longer thigh bone, you might lean a little bit more forward versus someone that has shorter proportioned legs. So I'm not worried about how hinged forward you are, as long as there's like this energy of liftedness, right? That I don't want you to lean forward so much that you're like here. This is not the move. Even if I'm someone that tends to pitch a little more forward, I want you to think there's this level of liftedness. My eyes are up, my chin is up. I'm lifted so I can come back to that standing position. And my last little tip about squats before we grab the weight is if your weight is in your toes, you're going to hit more of your quads. If your weight is in your heels, you're going to hit more of your glutes, more of your hamstrings. So let's just try it. Take all of your weight into your toes. Don't take your heels off the ground, but put your weight into your toes, squat down and up. Do you feel how quad dominant that is? Now sit a little further back, put all of your weight back into your heels, give it that nice solid squat. Do you see how much easier it is to engage your glutes and engage the back of your body? Sometimes it's all about just figuring out where your weight is placed. And if you're in the middle of class and you're like, my quads are on fire, just be like, oh, maybe I need to sit a little further back into my heels. Let's grab weights and just try it. Now, I don't even need to tell you how functional squats are. We do squats all day long. You are constantly going down and up, sitting on a chair. Every time you sit down to use the bathroom, you're doing a squat, right? So it's an important thing to be able to do. Get those weights up. Now, before I even drop, I'm making sure I have a nice solid base. I'm externally rotating. I'm tucking under just a little bit to engage my core. I'm lowering and I'm coming back up. Nice and smooth. Lower, come back up. Yes, another thing I sometimes see is people get really bouncy, like they bounce and they bounce. Try to make it smooth and controlled. There's almost like a stopping point, and then you come back up. Like there's a little period at the end of your sentence, right? Little moment, and then you come back up. Beautiful. Lots of different ways you can squat regardless of the variation you are doing. All of those tips we just talked about can apply to any of them. Our last move is a lunge, which is kind of a perfect combination of both a hinge and a squat movement patterns. Now we're gonna focus on back lunge and a side lunge, but kind of like front lunge, quarter lunge, all of these sort of things apply regardless of what direction you are going into. Now, the muscles working are the same as a squat. You're getting your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes, your calves, abductors, and obviously a little bit of core is involved. Now, to break down a back lunge, your movement pattern, your feet are the same distance apart as you would be doing a squat. So sometimes I see people step into a back lunge and they end up on a tightrope. So one foot right behind the other, and then you feel like you're super wobbly, versus there's distance between your feet and then you're just separating your feet, right? Even that's a little close. So there's distance here. There's two separate lanes. That's gonna help me stay super solid when I'm back in that lunge. Now, second thing I want you to think about is you're staying over your front foot. So I'm not taking my weight equally back and like sitting super far back. The focus is on that front foot. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a hinge here. Obviously both knees are bent, but I'm leaning towards that front foot so that I can easily stand back up. Because obviously if you're lunging, you'll want to get back up. So if I'm throwing all of my weight super far behind me, it's going to take so much more effort to get back to that position. So I'm taking myself down, I'm leaving my weight a little bit forward, so there's a hinge and a bend, and then I'm pushing through the ground, just like we talked about in the squat, to stand back up. If you're like, I don't know how far back I'm supposed to be stepping, another helpful tip is, I was trying to think if I had a broom. I don't think I do. You could take a broom, you could just take your arm. I want you to think there's a bar going across your hips. When you step back, you don't want either of your hips to let go of that bar. You want it to kind of stay that both hips are forward. If you step too far back, it's gonna open that hip and it's gonna make you feel super wobbly. So imagine there's a bar here, there's a bar here, there's space between my legs. I'm thinking of lowering and leaning forward, and all of that combined leads to a perfect lunge. I know it's a lot to think about. That's why we're doing this breakdown, so we can kind of practice the movement patterns before we go into our big, crazy cardio sculpt fast classes. And all those same things will apply when you take it to the side. So I'm bending through that foot, I'm hinging forward, and then I'm staying or coming back to nice and tall. So even though you're stepping this foot out, this is the foot that's working, so I'm taking all of my weight here, and then I'm coming back center. If you're like, Molly, I don't know how long to step to the side, and this bar thing doesn't apply when I'm going to the side, a side lunge is never about how wide you can step. It's always about how much you can sit into that hip. So it's the sassiest move that we're gonna do today. So even though my feet aren't super wide, I can still sit into that hip and put all my pressure there to then stand back up. You want one straight leg, one bent, and then you stand back up. And you lunge probably in life more than you realize. Like if you see something about to fall and you lunge to grab it, or like you're taking big steps, or you slip and you catch yourself, all of those single leg things you do throughout your day, they're just modified lunges. They're just variable lunges. So that's why having that single leg power is so important to practice in class, because you use it all the time in the real world. Now let's grab weights and try it. We're gonna try a couple back lunges and a couple side lunges on each side. And a front lunge is the same thing as a back lunge, it's just getting there in a different way. So let's find our nice even stance. Feet are right under my hips. My shoulders are back and engaged the entire time. I lower down, keeping those weights in front of my body, and then I stand tall. I like to think I'm sandwiching my front leg and I stand tall. Let's hit the other side. Down, stand tall, again, down, stand tall. Feels much more secure, much more grounded and balanced when you have all of those things working for you. Let's take a few side lunges at each side. So again, I reach down, I sandwich that leg, I stand tall, reach down, sandwich that leg, stand tall, other side. Beautiful. Now you know how to do a deadlift, a squat, and a lunge. But I want to remind you, these are not things that you're going to watch this video once and you're going to go take class and you're gonna be like, I'm perfect, I got it. These are things I even have to say to myself over and over and over again when you're in the middle of the workout. That's part of staying present, right? Because when you're working out, your body is always gonna try to cheat and make it easier for yourself. You have to be accountable of doing all of those things, making sure you're practicing your good habits so you can add more weight every single time. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful. This was just kind of like a starter, all of the basics about these moves, but we can always fine tune it as we go as well. Come back to this video every single time you need a refresher, and I will see you in class.